want to talk about the connection between being a high achiever and a people pleaser. Specifically, if you're a high achiever, is your desire for excellence something that you get to measure, or is it tied up with other people's approval? And I think we should probably start with the definition of the terms, because in the Cambridge Dictionary, a high achiever is simply somebody who achieves a lot. But would you ever look at Jeff Bezos and be like, what a high achiever he is? Because I don't think so. I think most people would be inclined to look at Jeff Bezos, who has achieved a lot, and say he's cold, he's detached, he's ruthless, he's visionary, he's an apex capitalist. He is actually also the complete opposite of a people pleaser. He might be goal-oriented and extremely tenacious and intrinsically motivated, but he's definitely not a people pleaser. In fact, he was known for being really demanding and sometimes unkind to people. He didn't mince words. He could be scary, and he was also okay with that. He's actually on the record in old shareholder letters saying that he wants his team to wake up terrified every morning, and not because of him specifically, but to keep their edge. Either way, if you are a high achiever, is that a mentality that you identify with? I'm curious. I'm Rachel, and I have spent much of my life in this category. And in the last 5 years, I've also, as a performance coach and a hypnotherapist, worked with countless high achievers. And in my experience, Jeff Bezos is an outlier. The high achievers that I meet tend to be thoughtful and sensitive and self-aware. But I think that the relationship that high achievers have to the world around them is interesting, and that there might be some kind of through line between the people in my world and someone like Jeff Bezos. So that's what I want to explore in today's video. Where does the high achiever tendency come from? How does it play out? And is people pleasing inherently involved in that? And if it is there another way of achieving that also isn't hardcore and ruthless like Mr. Bezos? Before we get into it, if you identify as a high achiever or even just an ambitious person, and you are interested in using the gifts of these personality traits to thrive in this crazy world that we live in, then definitely subscribe and follow along for more videos. And now let's get into it. Let's talk about what I think after my years of experience, both in the startup world and now coaching people who fit this mold. So firstly, I don't think that the roots of high achievement are purely down to intrinsic motivation. And something that I often say is that a lot of our core personality traits contain both a shadow and a gift, right? So having a huge amount of motivation is the gift side, and then the shadow side might be the way that you're using high achievement to get certain needs met. And I do think that that is where the roots of high achievement lie. I think it is in a childhood strategy to meet certain needs. And I'll reference one of the most famous books on the subject is called The Drama of the Gifted Child. It's by Alice Miller, and it was written in the early 80s. And in it, she says, what is commonly called giftedness is often the capacity to be more attuned to others than to oneself. These children often behave perfectly, not because they feel secure, but because they fear losing love. She also talks about how the gifted child is admired for their achievement, their cleverness, their obedience, and their manners, but not for who they really are. So what she's saying is that gifted children, gifted people are that way, not just because of intellectual intelligence, but because of emotional intelligence and their ability to sense into other people. Performing for love and praise is absolutely a survival strategy. And it transfers into academic performance, it transfers into work performance, it transfers into any way that a person strives to be good or to be seen as good by other people. So personally, I believe that a high achiever is not just someone who achieves a lot. I would define a high achiever as someone who achieves a lot under a considerable amount of pressure because of the emphasis that they put on external praise or benchmarks of success. So this brings me to my second point, because I think that might be the through line between the people that I work with and someone like Jeff Bezos is simply the amount of performance pressure that they feel. The difference in my hypothesis is what they do with that pressure. It's got to go somewhere, right? If your Instant Pot didn't have a release valve, it would explode. And in my observation, the types of high achievers that I have interacted with the most and that I have observed the most, they put that pressure on themselves. They work longer and harder and with more self-criticism and perfectionism than anybody else. They say yes when they mean no. They override the truth and their own opinions. In fact, I actually spoke to a really high-achieving woman recently who told me that the moment she hears an opinion that differs from her own, she thinks that she is wrong. And I have so experienced that. I actually used to be so malleable in my own viewpoints that I could take in 17 different viewpoints in a meeting and assume that all of them had some seed of correctness except for my own. That's how willing I was to sort of set myself aside in the name of approval and the group. And so maybe I just attract a certain type of person into my world. But when you look at the fact that 76% of US employees have burned out in their current roles. I believe that's the stat. Whereas it's 1 in 3 million people are a Jeff Bezos. 1 in 3 million people in the US are a billionaire CEO. It's a simplification, but the maths. People-pleasing tendencies absolutely make you more vulnerable to burnout, whereas a certain type of ruthlessness lends well to being a CEO. And it's interesting, too, that despite his intensity, his drive, and the level of responsibility that he carried while at Amazon, Jeff Bezos is nowhere on the record ever having spoken about burnout. In fact, he had good boundaries with work during his tenure at Amazon. He was known for prioritizing 8 hours of sleep and not starting any hard meetings before 10 a.m., and just generally having good energy hygiene. So where does someone like him put all that pressure to perform? Well, quite simply, let's just look at Amazon. He put it on other people. He put it on several 100,000 other people, to be exact. They're renowned for their corporate culture and their culture in general being relentless. And just look at it statistically, the corporate churn rate for Amazon is like 30%. It's 2 to 3 times higher than an average corporate churn rate. Jeff Bezos is also documented saying some really gnarly stuff in meetings. For example, are you lazy or just incompetent? And this document was clearly written by the B team. Can someone get me the A team document? I don't want to waste my time with the B team document. If your Instant Pot were actually to explode in your face, it would be less jarring than to take feedback from someone like that. And I would not be laughing if I were in a meeting with him. I would be incredibly nervous. But it's because he put that pressure onto other people that he was able to sleep 8 hours at night. So my takeaway is this. Maybe high achievers exist on a sort of spectrum. On the one end, you have the Jeff Bezos of the world. You have the people who are ruthless and who put all that pressure they feel onto the people around them. You could call this category the brilliant jerks, and Steve Jobs was surely among them as another example. On the far opposite end of the spectrum, you have the people who lean people pleaser and who take all that pressure on and put it onto themselves. The continuum just appears to be very heavily weighted to the people pleaser end. So my curiosity then, and the question I'm going to leave you with is, who is in the middle? What does a middle way look like? Can you achieve a lot without experiencing all of that pressure? I'm going to link you to a Substack piece that I wrote recently, and it's kind of meta because it's about my journey with Substack, but I unintentionally gave myself the gift of this experience. I decided that I would write for Substack for the sake of writing, like truly no concern for the audience, for likes, for approval. I just wanted to find my joy of writing again. And I did, but in that process, I was really surprised to find that the way that I approached writing just for myself was really not that different to the time that I have spent fastidiously perfecting other types of work for approval. It was a revelation, and it brought me some peace. And when I put on my hypnotherapist hat, I have some takeaways about that, but that's to be continued. For now, I'd love to hear what you think. If you identify as a high achiever, what do you do with all that performance pressure? Do you feel it too? Have you ever burned out? And if so, would you say that it was a function of how much you cared and maybe about other people? I'd love to hear from you, so drop me a comment below, and I'll see you in the next video.